I see builders making the same mistake over and over again, jumping into conversation flow because they think it's an upgrade from single prompts. But it's not just an upgrade, it's a way more complex tool for way more complex challenges. This is a complete walkthrough of every type of node that you have in conversation flow, so you understand what is possible, but also so you understand what you're getting yourself into, so you can decide for yourself, for your next project, is conversation flow really necessary? And most importantly, give you a framework so you can decide whether conversation flow is going to get the job done better and faster, or single prompt is going to get the job done better and faster. I'm Alejo, CEO and co-founder of Amplify Voice. I've built conversation flows for real clients in production, and I want to walk you through the power of conversation flow, but also the pitfalls of conversation flow. Today I'm sharing what we've learned and when this tool is worth the complexity. Conversation flow gives you step-by-step control over your voice AI agent. Think of single prompt versus conversation flow as giving somebody general instructions versus a detailed step-by-step checklist. Both have their place, but you have to know when each one is better for your use case. Let's tell you when you shouldn't use them. If you're building a straightforward agent that all it has to do is handle a conversation naturally and either do a transfer or an appointment booking, single prompts are going to be your best friends. If you're thinking, ooh, this might be cool to try for the next client, that's not a good enough reason. Conversation flows require more time, more complexity, more maintenance, and more testing. And you should lean towards using conversation flow when you require deterministic branching, very specific conditions or precise control over when functions can execute. Think lead qualification with many steps and several functions, or use cases where the order of operations matters way more than the flexibility of the voice agent. Finally, if your single prompt starts getting very hairy and the number of functions that you're dealing with starts mounting up, maybe it's an opportunity to transition your agent to conversation flow. You'll have more control over the transitions, what the voice agent says, and when it activates functions. So if you have one of those complex use cases, let's get you started the right way with conversation flow. Let's understand each of these nodes, starting by the most basic and fundamental of them all, which is the conversation node. The key difference between single prompt and conversation flow is that although conversation flow includes a global prompt, just like single prompt, conversation flow introduces these micro prompts that give you the control over what the voice agent says or does. On the right side, you'll see the general settings of the agent, same as single prompt, but when I click into the node, the options will change. And let's walk over the anatomy of a conversation node. First, we have the option between static sentence and prompt. Static sentence is simply the agent says this out loud. A prompt can be a little more dynamic. I don't suggest that you introduce too many instructions in any one node, but in the prompt what we get to do is we might say this, but then ask for clarification if needed. So when the agent not only has to say something, but also there might be other instructions, we go with prompt instead of static sentence. Then on the right side, we'll see some toggles, some options. For example, skip response. If I toggle this on, these transitions that we're gonna look at in a second go away. The agent will simply say what it needs to say and move on to the next node. Global node is something that's gonna come up. When you have a conversation flow, sometimes you wanna jump to a different situation. For example, if the user asks for a human, you would wanna transfer the call to that human, regardless of where you are in the conversation flow. So that's what the global node is for. Blocked interruptions will make sure that the voice agent can finish saying its thing before it receives any input from the user. LLM, one of the things that conversation flow has is for any one node, you can choose a different LLM than your general agent LLM. I usually don't choose this option and stick with GPT 4.1 all throughout the conversation. The node knowledge base is a situation where you need a knowledge base to only exist in this one node. There are certain situations in customer support, like say refunds, where you would need that refund knowledge base to only exist in those nodes as opposed to the whole agent. And finally, fine-tuning examples allows you to show certain example conversations to your agent, so when it is in this node, it knows how to react, what to say, and more importantly, how and when to transition. So if I click on those fine-tuning examples, you'll see that I can fine-tune a conversation. If the user says this, then you say that, or fine-tune the transition. If the user says this, then you say that and transition to a different node. We're gonna get back to this as we build our conversation flow. Please keep in mind that when you transition out of this node into the next portion of the conversation, whatever's in this box gets lost. whatever is this node knowledge base also gets lost, as well as these examples. Whenever you transition forward, the previous step will get forgotten. Not the global prompt. That's why this global prompt is going to be so important. And I'm going to show you how to build this single prompt inside of the conversation flow later in the video. But keep in mind, when we move forward, the previous step gets lost. The conversation history, though, and the dynamic variables get saved and move forward in the conversation. So the agent will keep full context of the conversation and the dynamic variables. Node number 2 is function node. And we're going to select a function. In this case, we have the embedded calendar functions and the custom function. Let's start with something simpler like the check calendar availability. So I show you the anatomy of these nodes. So now this purple node, the function node, is going to pop up and we can create a transition to that node. The check availability node is either going to return that the requested time is available or that it is not available, and here are some other options. So we can create these transitions based on what the function returns. For example, requested time is available, or maybe the requested time is not available. In either case, we'll get an opportunity to transition to some other node based on what availability we have. Some other options are the usual options you have in functions of single prompt, like speak during execution, wait for result, global node, which allows us to jump from anywhere in the conversation to this function, and then the other ones that we've already gone over. When we look at custom functions, the other type of functions outside of calendar, this is the same anatomy that we find in the single prompt functions, which I made a whole video about that will link above, so you can understand how to fill this out and make the most out of these functions. This can be really, really, really powerful, and I recommend that you combine this with N8N, and the sky's the limit. And I'm actually going to show you an example of that. So let's go into our next node, which is going to be call transfer. Let's say that if the user needs to return the package, we'll go check calendar availability. I know it's a little bit of a weird flow, but let's just go with it. And if the user needs to check the order status, then we're going to transfer the call to a human. We're going to set up a phone number to call, and the rest of this function is literally the same as a single prompt. And this is a good time to show you how the global node really works. If I activate this global node, not only will the user asking to check the order status lead me to this node, but I can also set it up so if the user anywhere in the conversation, even if they're, say, checking availability, the user asks to check the status of the order, we would jump to this node regardless of where we are in the conversation. So we would say something like, user says they need the order status, and then we have these other examples that pop up that are really, really interesting. We can specify some examples of when to jump to global node and when not to jump to global node. For example, if the user says, what's the status of my order? Then we would want it to jump to global node. I hit save, and that's going to be one of the fine-tuning examples. I can add another fine-tune examples to when to jump or when not to jump. If the user says, could I get a refund? That is not really checking the status of the order. So we would clarify, do not jump to this global node if the user says something along these lines. We would have only the user speaking. The agent will get to that later when we look at fine-tune conversations, and we're going to hit save. So now we have one example of when to jump to that node and when not to jump to that node. Let's keep going. Node number 4 is going to be press digit. This is simply press a digit in the keypad. So if you're navigating an IVR, the voice agent will be able to click digits on the keypad. You can specify an instruction of where it should go so it knows what numbers to click. Usually we would have this in an IVR, so at the beginning of the conversation. From there, we can transition whenever we reach a human into the conversation node. So what that would look like is, press digit to navigate to the right department. And then we would say when you reached a human, then we would transition to this node. And although in this example, we're, calling them and pressing digits, apparently they're calling our customer support. But let's just roll with it. In the next video, we're going to look at use cases and how to build a real use case. I want to keep it fundamental so you can follow along and understand each of these nodes. So number 5 is going to be the logic split node. Let's say we get to a point in the conversation where, based on the information that we've gathered so far, we need to make a decision of where to go. Let's say the requested time after checking availability is not available. But is there a time for tomorrow that is available? Or is it going to be until next week? So with the logic split node, we can do that. A time is available tomorrow, although the requested time is not available. And with logic split node, we can do that. Let's say we do this function, the requested time is not available, we transition to that logic split node, and we have these three conditions. A time is available tomorrow, the only times available are for 2 or more days from now, or else. And these logic split nodes have, what if none of these conditions match? Then we're gonna have that extra route. So in either case, we would wanna say different things. It's like, let's get you booked in for tomorrow, instead, since the original time wasn't available. So if our original time is not available, but there is a time available tomorrow, we would say something along the lines of, say, let's get you booked in for tomorrow instead. I've got availability at available times. And the reason we're using the prompt instead of static sentence is that the agent can use these previous available times that it got from the calendar to fill this in. This can also be a dynamic variable that gets picked up from here, and I'm going to show you in a second how to do that. But if the only times available are 2 or more days from now, then we would say something different. Offer the user the soonest availability. And that's the logic split node. Now let's go to number 6, which is agent transfer. This is a newer function that recently got added, which is really interesting, especially for multilingual use cases. So keep it in mind for that. This is the agent transfer node, and it essentially transfers to any agent in your Retell account that you want to transfer to. So this agent would have different instructions. Let's say we're qualifying somebody, then this agent would obviously have different instructions, but the conversation history and all the dynamic variables get saved and passed on to the new agent. You would really only use this when you have very different workflows within the same call. For example, you're doing a screening interview for a candidate for a job, and from the screening interview, they pass directly onto the technical interview, and there would be a separate agent that does that technical interview. Or if you're at the beginning of the call and you want to have a multilingual situation, then you could have a conversation node that asks the user, hey, which language would you like to continue in? And they say Spanish. And we would have different transitions for each language that you want to support. For example, user says Spanish, and we would transfer to this agent. But if the user says English, we would just continue the conversation naturally. So this agent transfer node has very niche use cases, but can come in very handy if you do have, a multilingual use case. Then keep in mind that you have this post-call analysis setting where you can pass the conversation of only the transferred agent, say only in Spanish, or the conversation history of both this agent and the transferred agent. Usually I'll go for both, but again, depends on your use case. Let's move on to number 7, SMS. Let's say that, there is no availability at all, so we go with this else node. And if there is no availability, we would send an SMS to the user asking them for their name and email and telling them that somebody will get back to them. So we would have this static sentence that says, please reply with your name and email and someone in our team will get back to you. Very straightforward node and works the same way as single prompt. Number 8, extract variable. This is the one you've been waiting for, because we can skip this logic and actually extract the variable of what the availability is. So we can actually extract the availability from what we receive from this function check availability cal. So if the requested time is available, let's say, we can create a transition to this node and say the variable that we want to pick up is the available time, and the description is the date and time that is available for the user, formatted in this specific formatting for the date. Or if we want to use that variable later down the line, we'll be able to, and we might want to format this in natural human phrasing. And we can even give it an example, such as Friday the 12th at 3 p.m. So we'll be able to insert this available time later in the conversation. For transition, we're just going to write continue, so there's not really a decision or a condition. We're just going to continue to this next node. And we can do this conversation node with a static sentence that leverages this dynamic variable that we extracted. I see a time available for available time. Let me get that booked in for you. And the next transition would be a function for book on the calendar that goes from this conversation node forward. And we don't really want a response here. We check the calendar, is correct, the time is available, let's book it. So we can skip response and go direct into the function. So this extract variables module, super useful. You can extract more than one variable. You can also do transitions with equations based on the results you get from these variables. Say you want to extract a certain number, so you can choose the variable type. Like, I don't know, the number of available slots. So number of available slots, count of available slots returned in the check availability function. That would be the description. And then the variable type is a number. And this number option is really important because now we can create a comparison, what in Retell they call an equation. So let me set up an equation for you. And we would just make sure that, usually I select all of the following conditions match. We would add a condition, say the name of the variable, which in this case is double curly brackets, number of available slots. And let's say that if this is greater than or equal to 3 slots, then we would go down this transition node. And if there are less than 3 slots, then we would go through a different path. So extract variables, super useful node. Then the final two, number 9 is the MCP node. As I usually say, if you've done this before, then go ahead and try it out and see how it works for you. If you haven't done MCP integrations before, then let it go. Maybe it's a situation for a future. And then finally, the end call. So we can end call deterministically. Let's say that after that SMS where there is no availability, unfortunately, we send that SMS, and if it gets sent successfully, then we just end the call. We can also add a little message before in a conversation node. Hey, thank you for calling. We'll be in touch. Goodbye. And then from there, we would skip response and end call. Keep in mind that end call can also be a global node. Just make sure that you put a message beforehand. So you can make this the global node and say, if the user says goodbye, then jump to this node. And we'll just say, thank you for calling, we'll be in touch, goodbye, and then end the call. So I hope that you see how this includes a higher complexity than just a prompt. And although you have more control, you don't get to not build a prompt. So let's look into that for a second. This is a prompt from one of my previous videos, and the structure is very straightforward. It has a role and objective, personality, context, then instructions and some subsections of this is how you spell, this is how you handle information, all that stuff, and then stages and example interactions. When it comes to conversation flow, I'm gonna copy paste this into the conversation flow global prompt. And what you'll see is that number one, the box is really small. Number two is that, well, aren't we giving the stages and the example interactions as we go? So suddenly this becomes optional. The important part is that your prompt doesn't get super bloated. See, this is under 1,000 tokens, it works just fine. So there might be a room to leave the stages and the example interactions to guide the agent a little better in how it should converse. But if your prompt starts getting bloated, this is the first thing to go. Stages and example interactions. So I'm gonna leave important reminders in there, but I'm gonna remove stages and example interactions. Why am I doing that? Well, once the prompt gets bloated, then your agent starts performing worse. And since the steps are already predefined and more deterministic in here, why do we need to give the agent awareness of the steps? Well, there's an argument to be made that you would want the voice agent to understand what comes next. And no, don't say goodbye, because there's a next step that comes even if the, say, appointment got booked. So in those situations, you would want to give the voice agent awareness of the different stages that are coming up next. But example interactions is something that I would leave for a node-by-node basis. And what does that look like? Well, when we have some complex transitions, it is in our interest to give fine-tuning examples. This is not a complex transition, but I'll just use this as an example. So we have two transitions. The user needs to return the package, or the user needs to check the order status. We always start with the hello, this is customer support department. How can I help you today? And let's start with the fine-tune a conversation. Let's say that our voice agent says that sentence that it will say, and the user says something that is unintelligible, or too short, or not clear. So if that happens, then our voice agent would say, sorry, could you help me understand what you need? So we're fine-tuning the conversation such that it can handle these types of situations, and we would hit save. This would get added into the fine-tuning example, but that's not the only type of fine-tuning. We also have the transitions. When do we transition to the return a package? When do we transition to the check order status? So let's add those fine-tuning examples. This is kind of straightforward. It's like if the user says something along the lines of, I'd like to make a return, then we would transition to check availability and we would save. So now we have the other fine-tuning example. And now the last transition that we need to handle is that transfer call, which is that bottom transition, which happens when the user was to check order status. For example, what's the status of my order? We would transition to the transfer call. This looks a little strange because remember that transfer call is also a global node, and this is how that shows up. But if you choose the right node, then you can trust that it'll lead to the right place. Keep in mind that renaming your nodes is really important. Why? Because when we get here and we have the node named conversation, and then the other node also named conversation, if I go to logic split node and fine-tuning examples, what's going to happen is I'm going to have two of the exact same name. So it's very important that for your sanity and your ability to maintain and improve these conversation flows into the future, that you rename these nodes to understand what's going on at every step of the flow. This is a very, very small, simple flow. Usually our flows for clients look 3-4 times as big. And that's why I urge you to be mindful of your use case and why would you use conversation flow? What do you really need of the extra added complexity of conversation flow? Because not only are you managing a whole prompt, not only are you managing the knowledge bases and the speech settings and everything else that you need to do in a single prompt, but you also need to manage all of these nodes and all of these functions, all of them individually and in a very, very specific order. So the last advice that I'm going to leave you with is you can create a conversation diagram before you start building a conversation flow. If you do decide to build on conversation flow, I would urge you do this first. It's going to give you clarity of what is the start, middle, all the functions and the end of your conversation look like. So when you jump into this whole beast, you'll be much more ready to make the decisions, the design decisions that will be required in order for your voice agent to perform well. So let me leave you with some final tips from actually implementing these. Number 1, name your nodes appropriately. Number 2, use the global node for instructions that apply all throughout the conversation, like spelling dates or times or numbers. You want to have consistency over how to spell. You want to have consistency over how to handle misunderstandings. So that's the type of thing that would go in the global prompt. Number 3, test transitions very, very carefully, especially when you add fine-tuning examples. These transitions are both the power and of the risk of conversation flow. And number 4, design before building. Go ahead, grab your Figma, your Mermaid, or your Miro, create a conversation diagram that represents every touch point, part of the conversation, function to activate, and decision branch. If you can't clearly map the flow on paper, then you're not ready to build it in conversation flow. This alone is going to save you so much time down the line and many headaches. I actually show you how to build one of these and deep dive into how to build conversation flows that are actually very sophisticated and actually perform a role for a company, for one of our real world clients in the community. So come join us in school and you can get the template of the Figma conversation flow and the 2 deep dive workshops that we've done in conversation flow. I'd love to have you and come join us for 4 live sessions a week, 2 build hours where we interact and help you troubleshoot your workflows, then sales hours to help you sell better, and workshop Wednesdays to deep dive into a technical concept. And that's why we did the deep dive into conversation flow. All the lessons are recorded and all the resources are available, ready for you to come in, learn, and grow. So come join us. I'd love to have you. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, then wait for part 2 that I'm going to be deep diving into an actual use case that we're going to build, and it's going to be a lot more complexity, backend functions and such. So hit that subscribe button so you can stay tuned for the next video, and remember to never stop prompting.